This is the presidential series from TP Newsroom, a four-part look at how modern presidents shaped policy, power, and the country we're living in today. Each entry stands alone, but together they show the long arc of decisions that built the America we inherited. Part 2. William J. Clinton. Bill Clinton didn't win the presidency with a revolution. He won with reassurance. He wasn't the anti-establishment outsider. He wasn't the moral crusader. He was the man in the middle, the one who made compromise sound like leadership. He told America it didn't have to choose between progress and order, that it could have both, that it could evolve without letting go of the past. And the country believed him. When Clinton took office in 1993, he inherited a country that had already absorbed a decade of Reaganomics, the first Gulf War, a mild recession, and a public trust deficit that had been building since Watergate. But what made him different wasn't just the timing, it was the packaging. He could talk to Wall Street in the morning, church groups by noon, and rap about Fleetwood Mac by dinner. He had the energy of reform without the policies to scare donors. And for the Democratic Party, exhausted from 3 consecutive presidential losses, that flexibility looked like salvation. But behind the charm was calculation. Clinton didn't shift the Democratic Party to the center by accident. He did it on purpose. Through the Democratic Leadership Council, he helped rebrand liberalism as third-way politics, an ideology that traded ideology itself for outcomes. And the outcome he promised first and loudest was economic credibility. Unlike the tax and spend liberals of the past, Clinton said he'd balance the budget, and by the end of his second term, he did. Under Clinton, the U.S. ran a budget surplus for 4 consecutive years, 1998, 1999, 2000, and 2001. That hadn't happened since 1969. He raised taxes in 1993, mostly on the wealthiest earners, and cut spending across departments. At the same time, the economy exploded, 22 million new jobs, declining unemployment, rising wages, and the lowest poverty rates in decades. The tech boom played its part, but Clinton's fiscal policy gave markets stability and investors confidence. By the year 2000, the Congressional Budget Office projected surpluses for the next decade. Economically, Clinton left office at the top of the hill, but that hill was built on trade-offs. For every budget cut that trimmed waste, another cut stripped public infrastructure. For every market gain, there was a wage earner left behind. And while Clinton cleaned up the national books, he outsourced the social bill. He made Democrats electable by borrowing Republican ideas, and that borrowing came with a price. Take welfare. In 1996, Clinton signed the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, which ended welfare as a guaranteed federal benefit. States got block grants, recipients got time limits and work requirements. Clinton said it would lift people out of dependency, and to some, it looked like it did. Caseloads dropped, spending went down, but poverty didn't. It shifted, it hardened, it became more invisible. In some states, families were cut off after 2 years, regardless of circumstance. In others, the work requirements created bureaucratic hurdles that punished the unemployed for being unemployed. There was no fallback, no safety net. The same president who balanced the federal budget also passed legislation that left thousands of poor Americans, especially single mothers and children, outside the margins of care. And then there was crime. Clinton didn't invent mass incarceration, but he accelerated it. In 1994, he signed the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act, which expanded mandatory minimums, funded 100,000 new police officers, and incentivized states to build more prisons. The bill was bipartisan. It had wide support. And to a country scared of rising crime in the late 1980s and early 90s, it looked like a reasonable solution. But the consequences were generational. Black and Latino communities bore the brunt. Low-level offenses became life sentences. Rehabilitation was replaced with permanent records and recidivism cycles. Clinton has since said he regrets aspects of the crime bill, but at the time, he called it smart, he called it tough, and he sold it as a way to win back white working-class voters who had defected to Republicans in the post-Reagan years. Again, the message was clear: progress doesn't win elections, optics do. The same logic applied to trade. In 1993, Clinton pushed through NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, originally negotiated by George H.W. Bush. It eliminated trade barriers between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Clinton said it would create jobs, and it did, mostly in white-collar and financial sectors. But it also hollowed out the manufacturing base. Millions of blue-collar jobs disappeared as companies offshored production. Small towns across the Midwest saw factories close and never come back. It was efficient on paper, but it was disruptive on the ground. And for many Americans, it felt like betrayal dressed in technocratic logic. Clinton called it modernization. Critics called it the end of industrial America. Both were right. That contradiction, success that hurts, is what defines Clinton's legacy. He won 2 terms. He left office with high approval ratings. The country was at peace. The economy was booming. But beneath the headlines was erosion. Real wages weren't rising as fast as profits. Union power was still declining. The safety net was thinner. Corporate power was expanding. And a new kind of voter was forming, socially liberal, economically conservative, and skeptical of the government unless it was cutting a check to business. That's the real Clinton effect. Not the affair, not the impeachment, not even the boom years. What he institutionalized was triangulation, the idea that you can govern by appeasing both sides, even if both sides are getting less than they need, that you can borrow Republican economics and Democratic empathy, stitch them together, and call it progress. And for a while, it worked, until it didn't. That's where we start. Not with scandal, not with saxophones, but with a man who rebranded the American middle and taught both parties that survival comes from meeting in the center, even if the center is shifting right underneath your feet. Clinton's domestic agenda didn't start with bold vision. It started with the reality of the 1990s. Democrats had been out of the White House for 12 years. The party was seen as soft on crime, out of touch with working Americans, and beholden to bloated government programs. Clinton understood that, and rather than fight that perception, he leaned into it. He promised to modernize liberalism, and the way he proved that promise was by cutting it. The clearest example was welfare. In 1996, Clinton signed the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, a welfare reform bill that fundamentally changed how poverty was managed in America. It ended the 60-year-old federal guarantee of cash assistance. Instead of open-ended support, welfare became a time-limited state-administered block grant program called TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families. Work requirements were attached. Lifetime caps were introduced. States could deny aid to families that failed to comply. Clinton said it would end dependency and promote dignity. It did reduce welfare rolls, dramatically. Between 1996 and 2000, the number of families receiving assistance dropped by more than 50%. But poverty didn't drop at the same rate. The people who left the rolls didn't necessarily leave poverty. They just left the system. States had wide latitude in how they used the money. Some spent less on direct cash aid and more on administrative services or unrelated budget patches. Others imposed harsh restrictions that made it harder for families to qualify in the first place. The majority of recipients were women, many single mothers, and disproportionately Black and Latina. For them, the new system added paperwork, surveillance, and conditional support. The message was clear: help is a privilege, not a right. And if you couldn't meet the terms, you were out. Clinton's defenders say the economy was strong and jobs were plentiful. Critics point out that many of those jobs were low-wage, unstable, and lacked benefits. Either way, the federal government had redefined its role. It was no longer in the business of directly helping the poor. It had outsourced that responsibility to states, nonprofits, and the private sector. Around the same time, Clinton took on another issue with bipartisan support, but long-term consequences: crime. The Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act of 1994 was the largest crime bill in American history. It included funding for 100,000 new police officers, billions for prison construction, new federal offenses, and expanded death penalty eligibility. It also implemented the Violence Against Women Act, which provided critical protections and resources for survivors of domestic violence. But the centerpiece, politically and structurally, was its tough-on-crime posture: 3 strikes laws, mandatory minimums, truth in sentencing provisions. It built on policies from the Reagan and Bush years, but went further. Clinton called it smart justice. At the time, crime rates were high and public fear was real, but the implementation hit unevenly. Communities of color, already over-policed, bore the brunt. Between 1994 and 2000, the U.S. prison population surged. State and federal prisons grew by over 300,000 inmates. Drug offenses, many of them nonviolent, filled cells. Private prison contracts expanded. Federal grants encouraged local jurisdictions to adopt aggressive policing strategies, often without accountability. Supporters say the bill contributed to the crime decline of the late 90s. Opponents say that decline was already underway due to demographic and economic shifts. Either way, the policy didn't just respond to crime, it reshaped the justice system. And it sent a message: Democrats could be just as tough as Republicans. That posture stuck, and it fed directly into the rise of the carceral state we're still grappling with today. And then there was trade. In 1993, Clinton threw his full weight behind NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. It eliminated most tariffs and trade barriers between the US, Canada, and Mexico. It was pitched as a modernizing tool, one that would make American companies more competitive globally while lowering prices for consumers. Clinton said it would create hundreds of thousands of jobs and reduce the deficit. For some industries it did, but for others, especially manufacturing, NAFTA became a death sentence. Jobs in textiles, steel, and auto parts began migrating south or disappearing entirely. Plants closed, towns hollowed out. Between 1994 and 2004, the U.S. lost an estimated 1 million manufacturing jobs linked directly to NAFTA-related offshoring. The economic benefits went to large corporations, tech firms, and financial institutions. The costs were absorbed by rural and working-class communities, many of whom felt betrayed by a party they believed had once stood with labor. It wasn't just the job loss, it was the message. Globalization was the future, and if your town got left behind, that was the price of progress. Democrats had officially crossed a line from protecting American industry to embracing global competition. And that crossing set the stage for the political realignment we'd see decades later, blue-collar workers moving red. What made Clinton's domestic policy unique wasn't just the legislation, it was the framing. He didn't run from Reagan's legacy. He adopted parts of it and gave it a democratic face: personal responsibility, tough on crime, free trade, balanced budgets. These weren't conservative ideas anymore. They were centrist ones. Clinton built a political model that traded safety nets for flexibility, local control for federal deference, and systemic change for short-term optics. That model won elections. But it also changed the party. And once you change the party's foundation, you change what it offers people and who it speaks to. Clinton's campaign promise was modernization. And in the second half of his presidency, modernization meant unleashing the private sector. The economy was booming. The tech world was expanding. Wall Street was stable and optimistic. It looked like the perfect time to take the brakes off. And that's exactly what he did. First stop, finance. In 1999, Clinton signed the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which repealed key parts of the Glass-Steagall Act, a Depression-era law that separated commercial banking from investment banking. For 66 years, that firewall had kept retail banks from using everyday savings to gamble in high-risk markets. By the late 90s, big banks were pushing hard to remove that wall. They argued that times had changed and that U.S. banks needed to grow and diversify to compete globally. Clinton agreed. The repeal passed with bipartisan support and minimal public pushback. Clinton's Treasury Secretary, Larry Summers, called it a necessary modernization. Supporters said it would increase efficiency and innovation. And for a while, It looked like it did. Banking mergers accelerated. Institutions grew. Riskier financial products like derivatives, mortgage-backed securities, and credit default swaps became the new normal. But that new normal came with exposure. Less regulation, less oversight, more complexity, and no clear guardrails. Within a decade, the same deregulated financial sector would help trigger the 2008 global financial crisis, a collapse rooted in subprime mortgage lending and speculative banking practices that grew unchecked in the regulatory vacuum Clinton helped create. Clinton didn't cause the crash, but he made it easier to happen. His administration laid the groundwork for the systemic risk that followed by choosing growth over guardrails and competition over caution. Once again, it wasn't malice, it was momentum. And that momentum pushed oversight off the table. That same philosophy showed up in media. In 1996, Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act, the first major overhaul of American media law in over 6 decades. The bill was pitched as a way to foster competition and expand access to the rapidly emerging digital space. The language was neutral, the implications weren't. Before 1996, strict ownership caps prevented companies from controlling too many TV and radio stations in a single market. After 1996, those caps were lifted. The result was a wave of media consolidation that gave rise to the mega networks we know today. Clear Channel, now iHeartMedia, went from owning 40 stations to over 1,200. Disney acquired ABC. Viacom merged with CBS. News Corp expanded its empire. Local voices disappeared, independent outlets got bought out, and the diversity of perspective in mainstream media began to collapse. What Reagan's FCC began in 1987 with the repeal of the Fairness Doctrine, Clinton's Telecommunications Act cemented. Reagan removed the legal obligation for news stations to present balanced perspectives. Clinton removed the barriers that kept those stations from merging into massive conglomerates. That 1-2 punch gutted the old idea of media as a public service. Now, companies could own the message and face no responsibility for its fairness. It wasn't just deregulation, it was deconstruction. Journalism was no longer an institution, it was inventory. Clinton didn't create monopolies, but he greenlit the legal structure that allowed them to grow without interference. The act also blurred the lines between content creators and service providers, laying the foundation for companies like Comcast, AT&T, and Verizon to control both what you watched and how you got it. That dual control now defines the way Americans consume information and the way narratives get shaped. It didn't stop with telecom. Clinton's approach to tech and digital regulation was similarly hands-off. In 1997, his administration issued the framework for global electronic commerce, a policy that explicitly stated the federal government should not regulate the internet. The goal was to let innovation flourish, and it did. The late 90s saw an explosion of online startups, e-commerce platforms, and digital communications. But that hands-off approach also let data collection, surveillance capitalism, and platform monopolies grow without limits. That's how companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon gained the room to become ecosystems, because regulation never caught up to the speed of growth. And under Clinton, the expectation was that it never should. His message to Silicon Valley was simple: build fast, innovate often, and don't worry, we won't get in your way. That policy posture wasn't Republican. It wasn't even conservative. It was corporate futurism, and it became the model for how both parties handled tech from that point on. Minimal enforcement, maximum profit, public oversight lagging a decade behind private innovation. Taken together, these decisions tell a single story. Clinton wanted the economy to work efficiently, but in chasing that efficiency, he concentrated power. Financial institutions grew too big to fail. Media voices grew too few to challenge. Tech platforms grew too fast to regulate. And the systems we live with now, our credit structure, our media landscape, our digital monopolies, all trace back to this window of deregulated growth in the late 1990s. He didn't dismantle institutions, he rewired them. He didn't crush oversight, He sidestepped it. He didn't invent corporate consolidation. He just stopped trying to stop it. And in doing so, Clinton created a strange political legacy. He was the last Democrat to shrink the state and the last one to be applauded for it. Because for a brief moment, the numbers looked good. The stock market soared. The budget was balanced. Unemployment was low. Poverty was dropping. All of it looked like proof that his policies were working. Until the cracks came. They didn't show up all at once. They took years. But when they did, during the 2008 financial crisis, during the rise of fake news, during the collapse of local journalism, during the tech monopolization of speech and labor, the pattern was obvious. What Clinton helped build was efficient, but it was also fragile. It made the system move faster, but it also made it harder to stop when things went wrong. That's the part that gets skipped in most retrospectives, because Clinton didn't leave behind a mess. He left behind a machine, one that ran so smoothly it didn't look like it needed fixing until it was too late. For most Americans, the 1990s were sold as a golden era, a time of peace, profit, and promise. But the version of America that Clinton helped build didn't hit every household the same. It looked good on paper, with stock markets surging and headlines celebrating balanced budgets, but behind those numbers was a country in transition, where efficiency came at a cost, and that cost was paid by the people who could least afford it. Take welfare reform. In 1996, Clinton signed the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, a sweeping overhaul pitched as a way to end generational dependency and restore dignity through work. The messaging was bipartisan, polished, and relentless. The system was broken, people were gaming it, and the only fix was accountability. But in practice, it created a maze of conditions, deadlines, and bureaucratic hurdles that stripped aid from families who were already walking a razor's edge. Block grants replaced entitlements, leaving states to ration support however they saw fit. Work requirements were imposed without addressing the realities of transportation, childcare, or mental health. The result wasn't a workforce uplifted, it was a population quietly pushed out of the data. Caseloads dropped by over 50% in just a few years, and Clinton called it success. But poverty didn't disappear. It just got harder to see. People were still broke, only now they were disqualified from help. Single mothers were hit hardest, particularly Black and brown women who'd long been framed as the face of the so-called welfare queen narrative. The country didn't solve poverty. It just made it easier to blame the poor for not escaping it fast enough. That same year, another major shift was underway, this time in media. The 1996 Telecommunications Act removed long-standing ownership caps that had kept local media diverse, competitive, and grounded in regional perspective. With those guardrails gone, corporate buyouts exploded. Clear Channel ballooned from 40 stations to over 1,200. Disney acquired ABC, Viacom merged with CBS. Local TV stations, independent radio, Black-owned newspapers, all began to vanish. The media landscape didn't just consolidate, it homogenized. Fewer companies controlled more voices, and the range of ideas in the public square shrank. News started to sound the same because increasingly it came from the same few places. Clinton framed the law as modernization, a way to embrace digital transformation. But what really expanded was monopoly. Control over what stories got told, how they were framed, and who was allowed to tell them. The same hands-off approach showed up in tech. Clinton's administration made a deliberate choice not to regulate the emerging internet economy. In 1997, his team released the Framework for Global Electronic Commerce, a policy document that effectively told Silicon Valley, grow fast, innovate often, and don't worry, we won't be in your way. It was a green light for platform capitalism before anyone even knew what that term meant. There were no serious checks on data collection, no consumer protections around surveillance, no structural brakes on the rise of walled gardens like Amazon and Google. The tech boom accelerated, venture capital exploded, and the groundwork was laid for a digital landscape where the lines between product, platform, and monopoly would blur beyond recognition. None of these policies were pitched with bad intent. Clinton wasn't acting out of malice. He was riding momentum, a belief that growth itself was the goal, that if the market was winning, America was too. But in choosing modernization without mitigation, he created systems that moved faster than oversight could catch. Financial institutions got bigger, media corporations got fewer, and tech platforms got smarter. And in that space, between acceleration and accountability, Clinton's legacy quietly took root, not in scandal, not in charisma, but in structure. The kind of structure that shapes everything we now call normal. By the time Clinton left office, the numbers looked bulletproof. The federal government was running a surplus. Unemployment had fallen to its lowest levels in decades. Wages were rising, inflation was stable, and the Dow had tripled since he took office. On paper, it looked like the American dream had been rebooted. But beneath the surface, the architecture of modern fragility had already been built, and Clinton helped design it. He didn't create greed. He normalized it, not in tone, but in policy. His presidency gave corporate America something it had been chasing for years: credibility. Wall Street was no longer just a necessary evil, it was a partner in governance. Tech wasn't just an industry, it was a national strategy. Media wasn't just reporting the news, it was becoming a product, bundled, consolidated, and scaled. Clinton gave those systems permission to expand without limits, and once that permission was granted, there was no going back. This wasn't deregulation for the sake of freedom. It was deregulation in exchange for growth. Not a break from government, but a redirection of it. Power wasn't removed, it was relocated. From public hands to private control. From agencies to algorithms. From oversight to optimization. And all of it happened under the banner of modernization, bipartisanship, and pragmatism. That became the model. Not just for Democrats, not just for Republicans, for everyone. Clinton showed that you could champion civil rights, embrace diversity, defend reproductive freedom, and still gut welfare, sign off on mass incarceration, and leave media consolidation unchecked. He split the difference, and in doing so, he made the split itself feel normal, like that was leadership, like progress meant trimming the fat, trusting the market, and making government lean enough to compete. But what got lost in that efficiency was stability, structural stability, institutional reliability, a government that wasn't just responsive to growth, but responsible for outcomes. Clinton's approach hollowed out the middle, not just economically, but philosophically. There was no longer a clear line between accountability and performance. If things worked, they were justified. If they didn't, it wasn't the policy, it was the people. That logic infected everything that came after. It became the default language of modern governance. If it grows, it goes. If it breaks, it's your fault. That's the real story of Clinton's impact. Not scandal, not charisma. System design. He didn't burn down the house. He rewired the walls, and when the lights flickered a decade later, during the housing collapse, the foreclosure crisis, the collapse of local news, the rise of algorithmic manipulation, it wasn't because the wiring failed, it was because it worked exactly as built. Efficient, profitable, and wildly unprepared to protect the people who couldn't keep up. Bill Clinton didn't break the system, he optimized it. He spoke the language of progress, but trusted the engines of capital to carry the country forward. And for a while, they did. The numbers rose, the debt fell, the machine hummed, but underneath the metrics was a quiet trade-off: accountability for acceleration, oversight for innovation, equity for efficiency. Clinton didn't steer the country off course. He widened the lanes, streamlined the rules, and let the market drive. What we're left with isn't just the story of a balanced budget or a booming tech sector. It's the blueprint of an era that believed faster was always better, and that regulation was the enemy of growth. That belief still shapes everything, not because Clinton said it, but because for a moment it worked, until it didn't.